Standardized testing is like the Super Bowl of teaching, only with more stress and less snacks. I'm John Van Dusen, a longtime teacher, coach, and Army officer. And in episode 33, we're talking about surviving and thriving during testing season. SAT, ACT, NWEA, MSTEP, PSAT. All of them are standardized tests, and sometimes they can seem very overwhelming. So, in this episode, we're going to talk about how to thrive during testing season. And first, we're going to start off with why testing matters. And this is a hot topic. If you talk to 100 different teachers, you get 100 different perceptions on standardized testing. And I would make the humble assumption that most of them are not positive. But the first one is it does provide some accountability. So I want to go fast forward to students their junior year. They may take a standardized test called the ASVAB, the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery. So it does not matter if you're from Texas, California, New York, New Jersey, Montana, Iowa, Michigan. It does not matter. Everybody is taking the same standardized test with the intent of helping them decide a good profession that they could perform in the military. So that is probably the best example of how a standardized test can be helpful. But back that up to third grade, and it seems sometimes like, why are we doing this? Well, it really comes down to accountability, and that's state accountability, federal accountability. I know that state and federal dollars are sometimes tied to those standardized tests. And, as human beings, we always want to compare ourselves to others. So we always take, you've seen it all the time, you take this district side by side, and let's compare who does better on reading, who does better on math, who does better in science. So it does provide some of that accountability, which is important. Whether you like it or not, it is important. Another thing that testing does is it does provide you some data so you can better your instruction. It can also provide data so that we can place students better. For instance, a seventh grader coming into eighth grade, are they going to go into pre-algebra or are they going to go into algebra? Sometimes those standardized tests can really tell the tale on if that student is prepared or not. So the other thing the data can do is help with any supports. It can identify some issues that may need further looked into for a possible IEP or maybe a student assistance team, but it can provide that data where we can compare across grade levels, the same student in third grade, fourth grade, and fifth grade, they struggled with this particular part of the standardized test. So we can look to try to get that student some support. So whether you like it or not, there are some positives, and that is kind of why testing matters. So keep going with the landscape of these standardized tests. Sometimes they're in the fall, sometimes they're in the spring. Eighth graders, we do them in the spring and the fall. It's a little bit wild, but it really comes down to it's hard on everybody. It's hard on teachers. It's hard on the students. We have that instant stress and pressure. And as a teacher, you can really manage this stress and pressure on the students in positive ways. And just as an example, let's say I were to just hand out this worksheet. Hey, sit at your desk, sit quietly. You have to do this on your own. Hand it out, and it's going to be a low stress environment. But if I take this and I say, you need to clear your desks, the only thing on your desk should be a pencil because we are taking a test, instantly the stress level rises up. So as a teacher, the students already know this is a test. They already know it's a standardized test. So don't make light of it, but you can also help them understand, hey, you've been preparing for this. This is something everybody does. This is something we do all the time. And try to relieve some of that stress, some of that pressure, have them do their best. A lot of times students are really worried about their grades. You can say, hey, this isn't going in the grade book, but explain to them, this is how we get data on placement. This is how we become better teachers. If somebody is struggling, we get data so that we can help them. So try to show them the why behind the testing. And sometimes that can really help relieve that stress. Now, something it will do is totally mess with your schedules and totally mess with your routine. I know as eighth grade staff, a lot of times we'll have 2 hour blocks for testing. So we'll do first and second hour, say on a Tuesday, and then sixth and seventh hour on a Thursday. Well, that kind of leaves those middle hours, specifically third hour. They never have a test during that time. So, as a teacher, you need to somehow figure out how you prevent those hours that you don't have testing from getting so far ahead. And I have some strategies that we'll talk about for that later. Just realize that it is hard on everyone. It's hard on the students, it's hard on the teachers. If you have something super strict like the PSAT, you're bringing other staff into the building for hall monitors and whatnot, and it gets a little bit crazy. But as the adults in the room, you can help lower that stress level and help your students out. So next, let's talk about how to prepare your students for testing season, because let's remember that you also have your state mandated content that you have to cover. So a couple different ways. I got 4 things on here. First, keep your routine. Students and adults really thrive on structure. So don't let the test prep, I think the NWEA, or maybe it was the M step, there's a practice test that you can take. So just put that as a part of your routine. Put it as part of your culture that, hey, you know how we prep for a social studies test? We're just going to prep for this test by doing the practice test. So you can keep it a part of your routine, and that's really going to help students out. Secondly, don't teach the content of the test. They always tell us teachers, don't teach the test. Like, okay, well, I can teach you test taking strategies. When I first started into teaching, all of our tests were done pencil, paper, right? Bubble sheets. Now they're all on the computer, which in some ways is good, but in other ways it's not as good, because I think we really lose something when we're just going through a computer screen. But you can teach test taking strategies just as you would teach them to take your own tests. If there's bubbles or if there's multiple choice, you can talk about elimination strategies. Which one of these is definitely wrong, right? So you can take 4 possible answers and narrow it down to 3 or maybe even 2. That's going to help them a lot. You can teach them time management. So if I have to read something and answer 4 questions and I'm spending 5-6 minutes on the first question, I really need to figure out a way to speed myself up. And you can do that with some of that test prep that you put in your routine. Also, understanding question types. So is it asking you just a fact-based question? Is it asking you to analyze something and say what you would do? So being able to figure out what they're actually asking can really, really help as well. Just as a fun example with that, when I was teaching 6th grade, I would put this story problem on the board, and it was very long, but it was long on purpose because I was teaching students how to pick out that critical content. And it started off by, there's 15 basketballs in the gym. And then it went on and said, the girls' basketballs are kept in the closet, the boys' basketballs are kept in the bin, and when it rains, the roof leaks, so then they can only use 2 of the 4 courts. And I had this big long thing, and at the end the question was, how many basketballs are in the gym? And I had students doing all kinds of crazy things. They would add all the numbers together, they would add some, subtract others, and they'd spend all this time looking for the answer, when in reality it was that very first sentence. There are 15 basketballs in the gym. The question is, how many basketballs are in the gym? So just teaching students how to read through those questions can really, really help. Not just for the standardized tests, which is what we're talking about today, but for any time they have to take a test, or even in real life, if there's all this information, let me look what's critical and what question is being asked of me, and I can help solve it. So another way to help students prepare is to make reviews into games. And that is super easy right now with Kahoot and quizzes. Blookit is one of my favorites. It creates friendly competition. The students really like it because it is a game, but at the same time they are learning, or they're all reviewing some of that content that they need to know. Another way you can do this screen for you would be with flashcards, do quiz trade type things, anything to get them where it's lower stress, but they're also reviewing and practicing can really, really help. And the last way I'll say to help students prepare is to encourage that self-efficacy. teach them about those SEL lessons that we talked about in episode 24 of the Classroom Coffee Break, and let students know that they can do the breathing techniques, the positive self-talk, the reflecting, the goal setting, all of those things that you talk about. It's not just SEL time on Mondays during prime time, but it's something you can use when I have some anxiety over this test. Well, I'm going to go back into my toolbox and I am going to see how this anxiety is affecting my behavior, is affecting my reaction, and I can do something about it. But a lot of times we need to remind students that they can do something about it on their own. And also let them know that they are more than just a score, right? So if they totally bomb it, it's okay. You still love them as a person. They do need to try their best, but at the same time, it's one score out of several thousand that they will get throughout their school career. So take it seriously, but understand that you are more than just your PSAT score. Next, let's talk about how to take care of yourself as a teacher during this test time, because it can be a little taxing, especially like I mentioned before with the scheduling, where I have this third hour, which there are 4 days ahead because of they never get a test period. There's different things that you can do there. So first off, try to plan ahead, because while the students are testing, you can do a little planning, but there's always those things that pop up where somebody needs a charger, somebody got kicked out of the test. You need to somehow figure out how to get them a new Chromebook. They're trying to use a wireless mouse. There's a million different things. So you can't really count on that time to be able to do things. So you really need to plan ahead. One thing that is always an issue in my room is chargers. So I always try to have some power strips around and remind the students, hey, if you need your Chromebook charged, do it now. Or another thing you can do is have them check the percentage. Hey, Mr. Van Dusen, I'm only at 20%. Okay, I'm going to move your seat before this testing starts so that you can plug in your Chromebook. All right, so the more you can plan ahead, the less chaos you'll have to deal with later. Now let's talk about that third hour, that group that you are inevitably going to have that never seems to have your class period as a testing period. You can do a couple things. One, you can just let them go forward with the lessons, which gets to be pretty difficult because if they're on a different page or a different project than your other classes, it can be really, really chaotic, not just for the students, but for you as well. So sometimes I'll use that third hour, and they help me a lot with maybe building out a review game for something we're doing in social studies class. Maybe they're the ones that build all the Kahoot questions that we can upload and then everybody gets to play. Maybe they're the ones that do this extra project that's fun, maybe not for a grade, but that all the other hours can benefit from. It was a few years back, I had my third hour. They actually wrote some journal entries from the Lewis and Clark expedition during testing, and we put those into what looked like an actual journal. So that was just kind of a neat project that I've been able to share with the other classes. Like, hey, let's go through some of these journal entries from Lewis and Clark. So different things that can be fun, low stress, but also keep them moving forward with the content without pulling the rest or pulling them behind, or, having your other hours try to miss some stuff. So another thing you can do to kind of help yourself is, if you go back one episode, we talked about those professional learning communities and really collaborating with your team. So as an 8th grade team, dividing and conquering all of the different pre-test and post-test tasks, types of things, whether that's collecting materials, getting the pencils ready, figuring out where students are going to be if they have to have the test read to them, or reduced answer choices or whatnot. Bottom line is you do not have to do it all on your own. So lean on your team, work together. And again, if you go back one episode, talk all about that. And the last thing I'll say with kind of helping yourself out is prioritize your own wellness. I know a lot of people think, well, it's just another day. Well, it's not another day because of all the other things that we mentioned. But if you go back to episode 17 of the Classroom Coffee Break, we talk about that work-life balance. And I mentioned before that students thrive on routine. so do adults. So the more you can keep yourself in that workout routine, that yoga routine, that eating routine, whatever it is that you usually do, the better off you're going to be. Episode 6 of the Classroom Coffee Break, we talk about teacher burnout and some of the techniques to help prevent those, which can seem to escalate during testing season. I'll say one, because of the time of the year. Usually it's in the spring, it's starting to get nice out. Everybody's kind of tired of school. And second, all of the other things that we talked about, all the additional stressors that come with testing season. So take care of yourself, make sure you're hydrating, make sure you're getting your exercise, your proper amount of sleep, all of those types of things. Take care of yourself, because you cannot pour from an empty bucket. All right, so the last thing we're going to talk about in this episode is post-test positivity. And the first thing I'll say is celebrate finishing. We just went through all the different stressors that testing season can bring to your students and to yourself. So have a little party, have a little class reward. Maybe it's you bring popcorn in for a video you're going to watch about your content. Maybe it's you take half a day and you have a tic-tac-toe tournament, something to kind of celebrate the ending of testing season. Another post-test positivity thing you can do is have your students reflect on the testing, and not specifically the information or the content, but how did you do with those test taking strategies? How did you do with the self-efficacy? What could we do better as teachers next year to help students with those types of things? But actually ask the students for their input, and you might be surprised at what you get. Sometimes they'll say, did great. I remembered the test taking strategy. I eliminated. I used my time wisely. And maybe you have students that don't. But understanding their experience is going to help you provide a better experience the following year. So testing season can be tough, but trust me, you and your students are tougher. So if you got any value out of this episode, I ask that you like, subscribe, share with your friends. And until next time, keep growing, keep learning, keep making a difference for your classroom coffee break.